has been the beginning of a world economic depression, which is still going on. In the middle of this, let's highlight the role of Great Britain, of Gordon Brown. He is in some ways the architect of the current form of the world derivatives bubble, and indeed of the practice of bailouts. You'll remember that this crisis began in the summer, in August of 2007, with the bankruptcy of Countrywide Bank in California. Panic runs on Countrywide. By October, it was something much bigger, Northern Rock, a bank operating in Great Britain, also in Ireland. That blew up. And at that point, Gordon Brown was the guy who launched this idea that governments would bail out these banks rather than simply applying the bankruptcy laws, winding them up, and wiping out their derivatives. And in the middle of this, the Bank of England, with Mervyn King and Alistair Darling at the Exchequer, deserves special attention. What were they doing at a time in the fall of 2007 when the U.S. and even the Europeans the European Central Bank, were lowering interest rates? The Bank of England insisted on keeping a rather higher level of interest rate. What were they doing? Well, this is the traditional beggar my neighbor policy of the City of London. And it means that the British pound looked at the dollar and the euro and said, only one of us can survive this crisis, and we will do our damnedest to make sure that the dollar and the euro go down and the British pound will survive, and London will reassert definitively its role as the capital of world finance. So that's the beggar my neighbor. Now, that had a special angle vis-a-vis the small country of Iceland, which we'll get to in the second hour. So this is the situation of a year ago. Now, in the meantime, what has been done? Well, apart from bailouts and from all of these facilities at the Fed and making the FDIC into a hedge fund under Sheila Bair with the PPIP program, it's essentially $24 trillion for the banks in the form of bailouts. The useful components of the stimulus, and they were there, $300 billion. So under Obama, which is simply the continuation of the Bush-Paulson policy under Obama, Geithner, Bernanke, it's the bankers are beating the people by a score of 80 to 1. A monstrous situation. Nothing has been done to derivatives. Rather, the approach of the Obama administration has been to stimulate the restarting of derivatives formation. In other words, they want derivatives to metastasize more than they've been. If you look at Obama's approach to mortgages, what is the approach? He wants to restart the securitization of mortgages in the form of mortgage-backed securities and asset-backed securities. That's where the money is going. The money goes to chase mortgages. The money goes to the colleagues of Angelo Mozillo, the gangster from Countrywide Bank. They got the money, and the rate of foreclosures of little people being thrown out of their homes is increasing. So $24 trillion for the banks, special payments for mortgage lenders, PPIP for hedge fund operators, special privileges, as always, for Goldman Sachs, and indeed for J.P. Morgan Chase, which is actually the higher level in this combination. They do a little bit less dirty work and get a little bit less bad press, but that is indeed the center of the New York money center operation. This is what's going on. So there have been no reforms, even now, 8-9 months into Obama and the Democratic majority. Nothing has been done about derivatives. Nothing has been done to stop foreclosures. Nothing has been done about any of this. The zombie banks rule. There's this pathetic charade of some kind of a consumer protection agency so that you'll be told what the risks are when you buy a derivative or you hock your house with a derivative. This is all a bad joke. And this is now the world ruling class that comes together at the United Nations General Assembly and congratulates each other that they have escaped the gaping jaws of a world economic depression. In my notes for this period about a year ago. Let's see if I can find it. It's in the week of the collapse of Lehman. Let's see if we can find it. The abyss gapes. That was Thursday, the 18th of September, 2008. This was the Putnam money market busting the buck, going below $1. This meant that the money market funds were all in trouble, meaning that this is the day also when the report was that $500 billion had gone out of the dollar in the morning, and that the dollar was going to collapse by the end of the day, and the idea of the TARP emerged. We'll be back in a minute.
America's #1 source for independent talk radio for over a decade. We are the GCN Radio Network.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster, Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. The UN General Assembly is going on, and good news for humankind. The global warming monstrosity of Copenhagen, scheduled for December 2009, is in big trouble. This, of course, was the attempt to strangle worldwide economic development with a carbon tax, obligatory binding carbon limits that would essentially undermine national sovereignty everywhere, under the cover story of this lunatic theory that carbon dioxide and related carbon emissions are somehow changing the weather. Clearly, this debate goes on, but the idea that it is a result of the sunspot cycle and solar activity is gaining ground, so much so that one of the leading honchos in this international political panel that the UN has cobbled together has said that we've now reached a plateau. He's obviously attempting to do a kind of limited hangout or a line of defense, saying the warming tendency has now slowed down and we've reached a plateau and we're going to stay at the plateau for 10 years. Now, of course, that is an attempt to mask the fact that in reality it looks like global cooling has set in. Get your 2009 Old Farmer's Almanac, and you'll read a halfway competent and rather interesting story of how sunspot activity and solar activity in general is the main thing going on with this. Now, Ban Ki-moon, the crackpot UN General Secretary, has called a meeting of heads of state, an emergency global warming carbon footprint summit for New York, featuring Barkey, featuring Obama, and the attempt was there to launch a new round of hysterical global warming rhetoric, but the conference is in trouble. Let's look, for example, at the speech by Chinese President Hu Jintao to the General Assembly in New York this week. He says, yes, we in China are willing to do all sorts of things for global warming and on, but there will be no binding carbon limits. And we know that there was this interesting convergence between China and India, found a common front, saying that they reject the attempt to strangle their economies and to throttle their economic development under the cover of this reactionary myth of global warming, a legend agreeable to rich elitists, to parasites, and to other very comfortable rentiers, but obviously not good for the poor people of the third world, people who get by farming maybe 1/3 of an acre in India and who have to use treadles, right, treadmill-operated pumps to get some water up to have a vegetable garden and eke out a miserable existence based on this. The proposition is clear. The global warming carbon limits mean that world economic development will stop. There will never be development of the third world, and the genocide will go on. It's 30 to 40,000 die every day from this, and it's increasing. 1 billion people with a B are on the verge of starvation. They're hungry and could fall into starvation at any time. The Waxman-Markey monstrosity here in the United States, if this were to pass, The export prices of U.S. corn, important for Latin America, U.S. grain, important for the entire world, would double at least. And, of course, when Goldman Sachs gets a hold of the carbon offset market, they will then more than double the export price of that food, meaning that hundreds of millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and other poor areas will pitch into starvation and death. It is an ultra-Hitlerian genocidal project, must be stopped. Now, Waxman Markey, this cap-and-trade, cap-and-tax monstrosity, is bogged down, but there will now be an attempt by the global warming fanatics to push aside everything and say we've got to go on to Copenhagen. Gordon Brown, in his speech to the UN General Assembly, said that the next 6 months will be decisive for the entire future of humanity. He said we